Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wassalatu wassalam ala rasulihil kareem amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear listeners, dear viewers, welcome to the first ever episode of the Scholar and the Student podcast. We are, as far as I know, someone can correct me on this, we are Botswana's first ever Muslim podcast, which is something that is definitely a talking point. So, dearest brothers, sisters, elders, whoever may be in attendance, welcome to this phenomenal occasion. This is our first time doing this, and we don't know when you're going to be listening in on this or actually watching this, but our assumption is that you cannot see us because this is an audio-only file. We do intend to have video recordings as time goes on, but for now, this episode at least is an audio-only podcast because we unfortunately at this stage do not have any video recording equipment of our own, and therefore this is strictly an audio-only podcast for this episode. We hope, inshallah, with the permission of Allah, that as time goes on, perhaps in the next episode or sometime later, that we will be able to have videos and then you can actually see our faces, bi'idhnillah. So, let's get this baby rolling. So, in today's episode, what we have in store for you, it's basically an introduction episode, just easing you into the vibe of things to come, and basically also, I guess, telling you a bit more of what is a podcast and what exactly we are trying to actually achieve by recording something such as this. So, I'm actually not alone over here. Obviously, this is not a video, so you can't actually see me, but I am not alone. With me is my co-host. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Mustaqim Hassan Rahat ibn Muhammad Ijaz Habib al-Datari. I'm originally from Mahalape, but at the moment we are in Palape. We are recording this podcast, and this podcast is homegrown right here in the heart of Palape. And with me, my co-host is Sheikh Jawad ibn Musa ibn Ahmad Dalabani. Assalamu alaikum ya Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, I am so grateful to be here, and Alhamdulillah, bi'idhnillah. First of all, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most kind, the most gracious, our nourisher and our sovereign, and for making this wonderful experience and availing it to us so that it can be of use to us. Alhamdulillah, we praise and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this golden opportunity, and jazakumullahu khairan, brother Mustaqim, for this opportunity and for giving us, myself of course, and everyone else inshallah, this platform that finally we can now be utilizing our voices to send the message across using this wonderful platform, this wonderful medium of information. Alhamdulillah, jazakumullah. I am so grateful. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward abundantly each and everyone who has been diligently tried by all means to make this a success, and also those who will be in supportive to this noble action, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward and bless each one of you, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it a success, inshallah. Ameen.
Ameen, thumma ameen, wa jazakum. So, when it comes to book reviews, well, I don't think we need to introduce books. We've all read them. We may have loved some, we may have hated some. But the fact of the matter is that in many ways you could argue that books are the primary means of education, or passing down knowledge, skills, and so on and so forth. Whether that be paperback books, which are still found in the plenty in the modern world, or whether that be electronic books, e-books, things that you read online. Reading is definitely a crucial skill, and as one of my teachers, Sheikh Muhammad Al-Sharif, actually goes on to iterate, reading is something of a superpower. I mean, if you go to countries where education is a luxury, and I believe Shashi Tharoor also touches upon this in one of his speeches when he talks about, he's Indian, so he talks about the situation in certain parts of India where you have women who couldn't read before, and then when they've learned to read, and all of a sudden it is literally life-changing for them, because now they can read signs, they can read whatever the billboards are telling them, they can read newspapers. So for them, and this is what they describe, it is absolutely like they have entered into a new realm of possibility. So I think many of us in the more developed parts of the world, Botswana included, I guess back in the past, people used to call it a third world country and an LEDC, a less economically developed country. But the fact of the matter is that, and I've been to a couple of these countries neighboring and a lot of other countries beyond as well. So our education, we praise God for this, our education levels, not to make a political commentary on what's happening right now or what the situation is, but compared to others, it is definitely a crack above the rest. Not to say we should rest on our laurels. We should definitely strive for improvement in all areas, including education. But I think many of us who have had that good education and who know how to read, I think for many of us, we take reading for granted and we don't see the actual importance of it. So I think what we're going to do with these book reviews is that we're going to try and inculcate that interest for people, that why don't you also go out and check out these books. And at the same time, I'd like to tell the listeners and everyone who is interacting with this podcast on the YouTube comments below, please go down, and if you have any requests, then let us know as well. We'll check them out, and we might even be reviewing your favorite books sooner rather than later. And it's also interesting in the fact that the first book we have lined up for this book review is, in fact, a fiction book. Now, some people may be jumping up and saying, yo, why review a fiction book? You're supposed to be an Islamic podcast. Well, if it hasn't been made clear already that just because we're an Islamic podcast, Botswana's first Muslim podcast, doesn't mean that we have to be very verbose, devoid of fun, and coming here with that, yes, this is halal and this is haram, and you should sit down and listen to me. No. We're trying to make this dynamic. We're trying to make this fun. And me being one of the hosts and me being one of the creative minds behind the scholar and the student, I think it goes without saying that my brain is not wired like anyone else's, so I have to inject my personality into it if I'm going to have this podcast be anything different from whatever else is being put out there already. So when it comes to fiction is very important, I'll have you know. I mean, it is part of our culture. It's part of our heritage. It's part of the legacy that we're leaving behind for the next generation. And there are so many benefits of reading fiction. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I will have to spend a little bit of time actually enumerating these benefits because this is the first book review. So in order for us not to have to repeat ourselves every time we review a fiction book or any other book for that matter as to why reading fiction is important, I think it's best we have this out of the way right here, right now. And I'd also like to shout out to Thomas Frank and Martin Bamey from the College Info Geek podcast. I was listening to them earlier on today. It was the episode, I think it was recorded about 2 years ago. It was the episode about them and their top 5 books. So Thomas's top 5 books, fiction, and Martin's top 5 books. So going off on that also gives me a bit of a concept as to what I should say for this very first book review podcast. So shout out to those guys. I don't know if you guys are watching, but if you did, it'll mean a real lot to me because you're literally my favorite podcast. Shout out to you guys as well. So the importance of reading fiction, first and foremost, it does make you happier. All right. I don't think I need to explain that you're de-stressing, you're taking a break from work. If you're someone like me, whose university degree, whose education hinges upon reading so many books and so many pages in a day, at the end, you get kind of tired of reading about cases and judges and academics and their takes on why this should be legalized and why this is incorrect legal analysis. At the end of the day, you just want to sit back and relax. So in that context, why not have a little bit of fiction to actually de-stress you? And if you take into consideration motivation and productivity, like what use is all that motivation and productivity if you're just going to be a slave to the machine? You have to take out time for yourself to refresh and come out bigger and better. And it may sound antithetical. It may sound like I'm contradicting myself over here when I say that rest and taking a break is actually productive in of itself. And if you don't believe me, you can go and check out the millions and millions of productivity resources out there that openly tell you, and this should be common sense, but as humans we're forgetful, so let's just remind each other, we're not robots. We cannot function at the same level of efficiency throughout the same day, throughout the same week, and throughout the same month, throughout the same year, throughout our lives, there will be peaks and there will be highs and lows and all these things that you have, because we are human, we have limitations. And the best thing we can do in light of our productivity is to be aware of those limitations, to take ownership of those limitations, and to work around those limitations. One of them being rest, and fiction provides an ample source of rest. That being said, when you experience a story in fiction, it allows you to experience a story vicariously. And this is something I'm taking directly off of the College Info Geek podcast. So what does it mean to experience a story vicariously? This is a term that we use in the legal realm as well. Vicarious means that you are experiencing it, or the effects of a certain event that we're talking about. In this particular instance, we're talking about reading fiction. So you are experiencing the same experiences of the characters, although it's not happening to you directly. So you may be reading a war story. You yourself are not taking part in the war, but because of the way it's described, you too can empathize with the character, and you too can go through the same sorts of emotions, or at least a fraction of what is being described over there. These are some of the experiences that you can take on without actually putting yourself in those shoes. And the thing about reading fiction is that if you're reading, especially if you're reading it from a book, as in you're not listening to it in my preferred way, which is an audiobook, I'll come back to that later. If you're reading it from an actual book, be it paperback or ebook, then when you actually read, your mind is actually simulating this, and you're playing a video in your own mind, and you yourself are the director and you're setting the scene, and this allows you to even go deeper into the experience. And of course, I'm sure that the audiobook version that I so love would allow me to do the same thing. It's just it's recited aloud as opposed to making your own brain do the reading, which I don't really have a problem with. But I guess we could have a different session on to why I prefer audiobooks, whatever the case may be, or maybe I'll just touch upon that as time goes on. And the thing about fiction also as well is that it does give you a better memory. As a law student, I always have an exam coming up, and even as of this recording, I've got an exam coming up in a few weeks. It's property law. So someone might object that you should be studying cases about the Law of Property Act 1925 and how it applies to registered and unregistered land. Well, okay, fair point. But one thing that you must understand about reading fiction is that when you actually memorize aspects of the story, whether it be plot points or names of the characters or the characters' motivations, the names of certain abilities that they have, when you remember, when you engage in this act of memorizing, what it does is that it actually creates space in your brain to memorize even more. So when I go and memorize the plot points and what have you of the story that we're reading, then it makes it easier for me when it comes time to memorize the cases and the judge's decisions and all the academic reports and journal reports and everything that I have to remember for my property law exam. I hope that makes it crystal clear. So when you engage in the act of memorizing, then memorizing actually becomes easier in other aspects. I'm not saying that you have to apply yourself to memorizing every single book that you read, but of course you will remember at least the story in a very general manner. You have to, I guess, pick up the points. Unless you find it a very boring story, then of course you'd forget it sooner rather than later. But the point was that fiction does increase your memory. And of course, there should be a no-brainer. It allows you to pick up vocabulary, which you can then use to enhance the conversations that you have and even enhance the type of writing that you do. Some of you may be in school doing your IGs or BGs or JCs, whatever the case may be. Some people may even be listening and they study English at university. I envy you, because I really wanted to do that. I might end up doing that eventually, but for right now, I'm just soldiering on through the LLB in it. Anyway, coming back to the point. So the thing about fiction is that the dialogue that you find is, generally speaking, more relevant to an actual conversation, or it's similar to an actual conversation that you have in real life, as opposed to a productivity book or a book on psychology. Not to cut those off completely, because I do love reading those types of books as well. But the point I was making is that when you see how certain words are used in actual everyday conversation, then that should
usually motivate you to use those same words in the conversation yourself, and that makes you a more articulate speaker. It makes you a better writer. And for those of you who know me from my old days, you know that I myself am something of a writer. And of course, that means I consume a lot of fiction, regardless of whatever type it may be, because a good writer is a good reader. And I believe Stephen King did say something along that line. And speaking of Stephen King, I'd like to send a shout out to my old English teacher, Mr. Christopher Smith. Smithy, you rock, man. He was in Zambia last I checked. If you listen to these podcast sessions as well, then I think I can take a breath of relief and say to myself that I have actually done something right in my life, because you are such an inspiration and I thank you. So that's interesting to note. But there are jinns as well. So jinns, I know a lot of Muslims might say that, well, the genie in Aladdin is kind of a very loose representation of a jinn. In the world of Castle in the Air, which is the same world as Howl's Moving Castle, which Diana Wynne-Jones has created, jinns and genies seem to be two separate types of creatures. For those of you who may be a bit alien to Muslim tradition or the Arab tradition in general, I'm not saying that all Muslims are Arabs or that Muslims have some, all Muslims have to follow some sort of Arabian culture or whatever. But what I am saying is that a jinn, just to make you understand, yeah, I guess you could literally translate it into demon. In Arabic, jinn, and I've done a bit of reading into this as well, jinn can literally mean anything that is not seen with naked eye. Some writers actually refer to insects and what have you as jinn. And it's not referring to any one thing in particular, but just to make it very clear to you, in everyday terminology, it could be referring to some otherworldly being or a sort of demon or what have you. So in the universe of Castle in the Air, they are a specific type of creature, which I guess you could call a demon. They've got wings, they're pretty hideous and so on and so forth. But they're not like Calcifer, the fire demon from Howl's Moving Castle. It's made quite apparent that Calcifer and the jinns are different species entirely, and then the genie himself is something else. So there was some interesting background to the novel we are going to read today. Myself, growing up Muslim, and maybe Brother Ishaq can expand upon this from a different angle.
Yeah.
Even though I've been born and bred Muslim, I know that the way I think is different, right? I'm kind of artistic, and when you are an artist, you will get that realization sooner or later, because you look at things differently. You look at, if you're a visual artist, you might look at a tree and say that, oh, that's a beautiful thing to draw. I'd like to give life to it in my painting or my graffiti, whatever it is. There are just so many ways of expressing yourself when it comes to art.
Expression. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but before we carry on any further in terms of the Muslim community and art, Brother Ishaq, maybe you'd like to give your perspective about, you didn't grow up from day one as a Muslim in that sense, but growing up, having that artistic sensibility, did you encounter any challenges, or was there some sort of pushback from family? Did you ever go up to your parents and say, I want to be a sound engineer, and they're like, what the hell is that? You should be a doctor or a lawyer or something.
Yeah, actually, it happens. Actually, I should just say that it actually happens with when an individual, once you start the process of growing, I grew up, I wanted to be a DJ myself, and my mom was so against that, whereby I would gather as many CDs as I can. As long as it's a CD, I'm okay with it. Actually, they wanted me to be a mining engineer, and I just didn't like mining that much. I wanted something with a lot of challenge, something that I would do passionately about it. And yeah, I've since I started school, I did my schooling. I was always good with sound up until went to tertiary. I did sound engineering. I worked for the national television here in Botswana, BTV. Yeah, I did a bit of sound there, and then inshallah, by the mercies of Allah, I met Islam, and I was like, wow, my passion, my gift can be used in the path of Allah, to spread the message, dawah, to give dawah, to spread the message, to get to we're living in the is it 21st century, or it's even more than that?
No, it is. Yeah. It is still the 21st.
Oh, it's 21st century. Now imagine in 21st century,
unfortunately,
everything is just what should I say? Everything has moved to digital. You talk of even a very good example. Even the Quran nowadays, you can get apps, nice apps, and you can even get nice apps that remind you when it's time for Salah.
Definitely.
You get nice apps whereby you don't basically need what do you call it? That to make dhikr. You don't need yeah, you just have to click on the phone. As long as you're concentrating, I'm basically talking about the civilization that has happened. I don't know whether should I say civilization, but yeah, something has happened.
We have progressed as a civilization.
Exactly. So, I was like, but why is it like in Islam, why don't we take this to another level? Because the message was not contradicting itself. And everything is outlined, what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and why also to do it. I was like, now, just to give you a very good example, here in Palape, just a rough estimation, just get out, move about, ask people, do you know where the Islamic center is in Palape? They'll be like, they don't know. But if you ask them about one local church, they probably know where to direct you, because these people, they are very active on Facebook, very active on WhatsApp. Why can't we be active as well?
Yes.
I mean, it is Allah who gives us the brains to think that to develop these applications, to even use. Why should I just use Facebook to communicate with the brother? Why don't I just take another step to use Facebook and invite somebody, or give somebody dawah, or invite somebody and tell them like, I'm going for Salah. Why don't you join me?
Yes.
Just it all starts there, one step.
People don't really like preachers. I mean, like if I go up to someone on the street and I give him, like, just out of the blue, give him a leaflet and like, yo bro, you know about Islam, and I just start shooting at him like one time like that and give him the whole thing. I don't know what this guy has been through. Like, why is he even here? Maybe he's had a long day. He doesn't want to talk to anyone. He just wants to go home and sleep or something. And here I am bombarding him with the whole thing and trying to get him to, change his faith and all this kind of thing. So I'm not saying that there is no place for da'wah in Islam, but it has to be done tactfully. And second of all, the whole point of this is that even if you do something with passion, it should inspire people to come to Islam. So if that was then, what about now? We should really allow our children to express their self-authenticity, and that is going to be my final and most important theme that I'm going to touch on in this review. So just as the previous two entries in the series, with Howl's Moving Castle having that theme of the magic within us, which plays a part here as well. We've talked about how Charmaine has had an inherent ability in magic which she never got to express, but obviously she was able to once she was able to fiddle with Great Uncle William's spells and what have you. And obviously the other aspects which are callbacks to Howl's Moving Castle, for example, the way she casts spells is very akin to Sophie's, which is basically just speaking out a command and telling taps that are red hot to go cold, or telling leaks to fix themselves. A very straightforward way of casting spells, which I guess drives home that fact that there is an element of magic within all of us, and not just within the universe of Howl's Moving Castle where magic is an actual thing, but if we look at it even more broadly, the concept that all of us have got something to offer to the world, to make this world a better place, and basically give our light, our energy to make this world a better place, if I can put it that way. Because we went to the same school, went to Kaswe together, so you never even... I remember, well, there were some assembly plays and those things, but I guess you don't really get to express yourself as much then.
Yes, and I was a different guy back then. I was very shy, very... I was influenced by a lot of people, I couldn't just express myself, become my true self.
Well, self-authenticity is very important. I was actually recording a book review last night as well about House of Many Ways, and one of the themes in that book is about being authentic to yourself instead of just gobbling up what people tell you to do. People want you to be a certain way because it suits them and suits their agenda and whatnot. And look, if you want to be like that, that's fine. But you have every right as an individual to break away from that mold and be the self that you want to be. What's your take on that? And I believe Kahawa Entertainment is trying to push that agenda forward, that message forward, because I follow your skits. I remember that skit with Bo Hashma, that first one that was shot in Madiba, was it? Yeah, that was the first one I think I saw properly, and then obviously I got involved in one of them. Like I said, I'm in one of them. I'm very chuffed about that, my acting debut. I'll be telling
many more people.
Yes, I'll be telling my grandchildren about that first one. Anyway, so yes, I was saying that I feel that Kahawa and whatever it does in everything that we follow it, whether it's photography, whether it's the skits that you guys are putting out, it's just this message of being authentic to yourself and not being bound by these artificial chains that many people just create in their minds. No one said that you have to do it like this, but just because you never bothered to think outside the box, or not even you, someone is feeding you this and they never thought to think outside the box. Now you are just digesting what they're saying and spitting it out as if it's your own thing.
Speaking of that, Moss, it's just the topic of generational curses, you know. Because the generations before us have done what they're doing, we have to follow in their footsteps, which don't necessarily relate to us. So Kahawa, we believe in self-identity. Even our skits, our videos, like you said, everything is us. Our acting is the same as our music. We just channel the same energies. Because we feel like if you're yourself, you can reach your goals faster. You make money faster. Everything comes faster because you're being yourself. It becomes easy, you know.
Yeah, so, and just to speak on that, I read something the other day. It was about the previous generation. Their objective was survival.
Yes.
Whereas our objective is self-actualization.
Yes.
Finding out who we are, where we fit into this big puzzle called the world, and how we can use our gifts that we have to make this world a better place. So the world has become a different place from when we're not dissing anyone's parents. We're not saying that get rid of the old generation and what.
It's all education, people.
Yeah,
education.
I mean, sometimes we might come out as frustrated, but I guess that's part of the process. But the fact of the matter is that the world is a different place. Even from when we were children, I would say things were a lot more simple. Maybe that's just us growing up, or maybe the world genuinely has changed. But in this day and age, we can't just stick to the same things that our parents and grandparents did and expect us to come out okay, because their challenges and whatever skills they had were tailored to that generation, and us, we are something else altogether.
And we mentioned Hermione earlier, and I'm glad we did. But it's interesting that although she's from Muggle parentage, she breaks all the ideas, and she fits very much of this idea of piety, of taqwa, that we understand, that she excels and becomes the best person. She becomes amongst the most knowledgeable people in wizarding society. And it doesn't matter what lineage she came from. And also, as well, like I see a lot of Muslims, it's almost like some Muslims adopt a pure blood supremacy sort of attitude, whether they refuse to let children marry outside their race, and the like. And then also, as well, you see that there is a philanthropic element amongst some of the characters in Harry Potter. So when Hermione, she's campaigning to fight a lot of the sort of like inequalities in wizarding society. So has an egalitarian streak towards house elves, towards goblins. And then when she later becomes a ministry official, it's mentioned in some of the appendices of Harry Potter. She fights for the rights of house elves and everything. And then also you see amongst a lot of the Sahaba, a lot of them freed slaves. So it's not just like you see in Harry Potter, it's not just fighting the enemy Voldemort, but it's also fighting for a more fairer society amongst your friends and standing up to your friends who hold racist attitudes and fighting social vices such as bigotry. And then also what's really interesting in the last book, it's very much a fight against racism as anything else. So Umbridge is the head of the Muggle-born Registration Commission when, for those who don't know, in the book, the Ministry of Magic is taken over by Voldemort's acolytes, and she participates in the persecution of those who are born in non-magical families. And Voldemort and J.K. Rowling said, like, Voldemort uses almost like what we'd recognize as Nazi symbols. And of course, we know as Muslims we stand categorically against all the sorts of racism. So racism, much like in Islamic scripture and theological works, is thoroughly condemned as it is in the Harry Potter series. So there is that very strong egalitarian streak which runs throughout the Harry Potter series.
Excellent. I had two thoughts as you were speaking about this. First of all, it seems that J.K. Rowling really wrote a lot about diverse characters without actually putting that at the forefront of her mind. I mean, I know she's gotten a bit of a reputation lately for making some changes here and there and talking about characters' sexuality and how it wasn't addressed in the books, but it was addressed in some random interview over there, so she gets a lot of flack for that. But I was just thinking, in today's day and age of media, and how there's this push for some forced diversity in movies or film or whatever it is in books, J.K. Rowling managed to write a diverse set of characters without actually putting her mind to it in that sense. She was writing about everyday social ills, and yet she still came up with this diverse set of characters with their own challenges that very much parallel the real world. We talked about Nazism and racism and what have you. The other thought that I had as we were going through this is that, you know, these challenges of racism, of supremacy and what have you, seem to be a universal human problem.
Exactly.
The way we look at it as Muslims is that Islam came as a solution to these problems that humans have, you know, accumulated over the years. So naturally, when we look at something like Harry Potter, which parallels real-world problems, obviously we're going to see a parallel with Islam, because Islam is a solution to those problems.
Exactly.
For me, the principles that stood out were the principles that allowed you to be yourself, that allowed you to live your subject, that did not check on you all the time, that did not expect lists and tick lists and whatever every single day, but gave you the freedom to be who you are and to transfer the knowledge in your specific way, because we're all different. We all know that people learn differently, so why can't people teach differently as well? And then the results will come.
Of course, and it's interesting you mentioned that. In the Islamic tradition, when you talk about Islamic knowledge, of course nowadays you've got the internet and what have you, and of course definitely we can do a lot of research, but there's still this emphasis on having a link to a physical teacher, this human link, because not only do they impart on you the knowledge from the books and the Quran, what have you, but also their personality, their characteristics and their mannerisms, the way, their etiquette, their way of speaking, the way of respecting people of different backgrounds and different opinions. And it's amazing that the more we analyze every facet of knowledge that we have on the earth, the more it just seems to come back to the same place. You realize that knowledge is such a vast ocean, but it all has a common thread running through it at the same time. And if we can bounce on that, you are someone who has had immense respect, I would say, myself being one of the Muslim students of Qaswe, that has had immense respect for all religions or creeds or people from all sorts of walks of life. I mean, I would say that definitely, not to, you know, bag on anyone who came before you or whoever's going to come after you, but I always felt that there was this element of you having respect, immense respect, and shall I say a bit of curiosity for those of other faiths and other creeds and other walks of life, people who just had a different way of approaching problems and looking at life in general. Is that also something that you developed along the way?
Certainly. You know, when I grew up, all Russians were the enemy. In South Africa, they talked of the red danger from Russia. You grow up with the idea or with the perception that all Jews have big noses. And, you know, the day comes when you realize that it's only a perception.
Yeah.
For me, so important to understand the other person is to get to know the person.
Of course.
If I know you well enough, and I mean, Moss, I've known you now for 9 years, I don't see what you look like. I know the person. I know Moss and what he can accomplish and what he can achieve. I know that, and I know the person, and we've shared many thoughts, I'm sure, in the past.
Yeah.
And similarly with any child from any background, doesn't matter where they come from, who they are, as soon as you know the person, you don't think of the color or the religion or the creed or whatever they are. It's the person that matters. And if we all look at it that way, then this life would be such a beautiful place to live in, because we all grow up. Can I tell you a story about my sister's son?
Please do.
He was about 5 years old in Standard 1, 5, 6 years old in Standard 1, in a private school in South Africa. And it was in those days already, because it was a private school, they accepted black students and Indian students or whatever the case may be. And he had a little friend come and play over in the afternoon. So my sister picked both of them up and took them home, and they had a sandpit in front of the house. And they were playing there with their little cars or whatever the case may be. And then 5 o'clock came, and the boy's father drove up the driveway. My sister was standing behind the two boys. They didn't know that she was there. And he drove up in the driveway because she'd opened the gate for him. And he got out of the car. And Dirk, that's her little Snow White son, said to his friend, "I didn't know your father was black."
Okay.
You know, that perception that when you're that age, none of us see the difference. It's only later that we are influenced, indoctrinated, if you wish,
Of course, yes.
to have certain beliefs about certain people and who they are and what they are. And we all know that that's wrong. But in the world we live in, unfortunately, a lot of it gets lost. We don't see that empathy with another person unless we know the person.
And it's sad that modern politics seems to be taking a lot of this bias into stride and basically taking it to the next level. I mean, with fear-mongering and what have you in modern politics, it's sad really that we can't see past appearances and what we hear about certain groups of people instead of actually judging them for what they are themselves. I mean, because it's really funny that people try to group all, let's say, all white people, all black people into one single group. That's absurd, because every individual has got their, as we mentioned earlier, rebellious characteristics. Everyone wants to go away from the herd every now and again. Everyone wants to give their own breath of life into this world, if I will. So, yeah, it's really funny that people try to look for ways of, first of all, dividing us, and second of all, I was listening to one of my teachers from the UK, from Birmingham recently, and he said that never in history have humans been so insecure about their identity. I mean, previously, if you were, for example, you were a Turk, that was that. But today, everyone has to be, I mean, this comes out in England a lot. I mean, yes, I am British, but I'm also Pakistani from my parents' side. And blah, 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 blah. And everyone has to be like this instead of just sharing the commonalities we have. And yes, I agree that, in many ways, there are those differences that we have that must be celebrated. But also, why can't we just spend more time sharing the commonalities between us and enjoying life for what it is?
Absolutely true. Before I came to Botswana, I had very, very little contact with the Muslim faith. I met the first Muslims really face to face when I moved to Botswana, and then realized that they're just like people like us. They are exactly the same. I shall never forget Moss. When Mr. Smith, you will remember, and his wife did a play at the school, and Moss was in the band, and Moss's face was dark lines, and I don't know, under his eyes it was dark. I thought, he's a Muslim, he's not supposed to do that. Only later on to realize that, of course, it's not because he's a Muslim that he's not allowed to do this, because we have this perception that Muslims are isolated, that they isolate themselves and they don't communicate and they can't be themselves, and only to discover that it's the opposite is actually true.
Talking about some program that we intend to start, more like One Day Leader from South Africa, but it's called Tomorrow's Leader Today in Botswana, right? So we're having a creative session there where we wanted to change the place. We wanted to get the place looking juicy, young, vibey, you get the drill. So I told them that whatever we do, we should just aim to be different. However we do it, we should just aim to be different. And our approach to this is what really matters. And the first approach is what counts, because first impressions always last, right? But on that note, it would be nice if somebody out there did bring that YouTube money back, because it would also motivate us to put that Tomorrow's Leader program out there. But on the program again, it's very nice if we were going to talk about it here now, because I feel like it's a very wonderful platform where we get to bring young debaters, tomorrow's leaders today, as the name dictates, right? What do you think?
I think it's a very illustrious endeavor and something that everyone who has the opportunity should definitely jump on. And I'm going to put it out there as Muslims once again. I can say from experience as a Muslim, someone who was born as a Muslim and who has had various experiences with the faith. My first 12 or so years of my life, I was what we call a cultural Muslim, as in I went to mosque on Fridays because that's what my dad did and that's what everyone else in the house did. So when you're at that age, you just follow what everyone else is doing. When you get older, sometimes you drift away, but then when you understand exactly what was going on back there, then you come back and you enforce it with everything that you've already said. So I think that as Muslims in particular, because this is kind of, I don't know if you'd even call this a Muslim podcast, it's hosted by a Muslim guy, yeah, but we're not here to preach and give sermons and that. Go somewhere else for that. I am someone, as you said, like you, who thinks differently. And the session I recorded before this was Harry Potter and Islam. And I talked to a guy from the UK, Brother Salahuddin. He's got a page on Instagram called Adventures in Fashionistan, so I'm plugging him in here as well. So Harry Potter and Islam is not something that you'd be hearing about. At least in Botswana, I've never heard of anyone speak about something like that on a Friday, giving a sermon about that. But we had an interesting discussion on that. So what I'm getting at, why I'm mentioning all this, is that as Muslims, we should also be able to open our minds, be familiar with different arguments, and be able to articulate our own viewpoints via these arguments and on these platforms such as this Today's Leader Tomorrow program and so on and so forth. From what I understand, it is very much in its infancy. I know a lot of Muslims have a lot to say about things such as feminism and rights of homosexuals and abortion and all that. And just so you know, it's not as black and white as you would like to think. There is actually a variety of opinion on some of these matters, such as abortion and all the... I'm not a scholar myself, but having studied under other scholars and actually going through the literature and seeing that these issues can be very nuanced and complex sometimes. So for you to just sit there in your house on that YouTube comment section just saying, yes, it is allowed, or no, it is not allowed, it's not as simple as that. There's an actual training that someone goes through before this. But definitely Muslims should jump on this and see how they can be more creative and be able to familiarize themselves with more creative arguments. Because debate, at the end of the day, is basically formulating arguments from a creative angle. Being able to not exactly outsmart your opponent, but take what he said and basically fling it back to him.
Growing a thick skin, yeah, for you, for anybody else, this is number one. If we can grow a thick skin, and for me, the one I look at is, I always look at the early Muslims as my role models. The life of Imam Abu Hanifa, the way he was so uncompromising, even when they put him in prison.
Subhanallah.
The same thing with Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, with Ibn Taymiyyah. I look at people like Imam al-Ghazali. Imam al-Ghazali, he was famous at a young age, and he gave all of that up and disappeared just to work on his nafs and just to sort out his own intentions. These are my role models, and these are the people whose lives I keep reminding myself of. As you may know, I recently wrote a 300-page book on the life of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And that's really one of my primary role models, because Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was a man who went completely against the grain. I mean, he was an Umayyad prince, but he was from the awliya. The idea of an Umayyad prince becoming a wali, becoming a truly saintly figure in the history of Islam. And I mean, leave alone people turning against you and talking about you, his cousins literally killed him. What level of social problems is worse than being killed by your own family? His cousins had him poisoned, and he died in his 30s, at the age of 37, because of it. People like him are my role models. I look at them and I say that they did this, they understood this message, they understood this responsibility. We have to follow in their footsteps, and we have to be willing to do the same. We have to be willing to go through the same. Like from the ulama alive today, my favorite role model is Sheikh Salman Al-Auda. Alhamdulillah, in 2007 and 2008, I had the blessing and opportunity to attend some of his lectures live and in person. And they had a profound effect in changing my understanding of fiqh and changing my understanding of this religion completely. And right today, I read his books. There are some books of his that I've read over and over again multiple times. His books on being a student of knowledge and his books on dealing with differences of opinion. I've read those books multiple times because they really shaped my understanding of these topics. He, for me, is a role model of what an alim needs to be. The fact that no matter what people have done to him, he remains uncompromising on his understanding of this moderate Islam and trying to preach it to people in a country and a place where moderation is not just frowned upon, but you're in prison for it. He's really a role model to me. Allah free him and release him, and grant him great rewards for everything that he's going through for the sake of our deen. So alhamdulillah, that's really growing a thick skin is number one. If you can grow a thick skin and do things for the sake of Allah, nothing phases you. No matter what people say or do, nothing phases you, because it's all about Allah. It's not about this world. It's not about your reputation. It's not about whether you're famous or not. It's all about, are you doing work that's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
Subhanallah, and that is so true. And you mentioned Lord of the Rings. Last week's episode on this podcast was about Harry Potter and Islam. So, Allah na kare that those Salafis who refuted you will find that episode. But anyway, I always put a disclaimer on this podcast when I do my book reviews, because so far I've reviewed 3 books on this podcast, and they've all been about, well, why don't you take a guess what they've been about?
You've reviewed 3 books?
Yeah, I've reviewed 3 books on this podcast. If you haven't checked them out, just take a guess, like what I've reviewed so far. Besides Harry Potter, that was an entire series, but okay. Besides that.
Are you talking about fictional books or?
Yeah, so far they have just been fiction. Obviously, I do plan to do.
Yeah, and I know amongst our Indian Muslims, they have this idea that fiction is lies, so fiction is haram.
Yeah, I mean,
which is completely nonsensical, because one of the oldest works of fiction in the world is Arabian Nights, 1001 Nights, written by Muslims during the Golden Age. I mean, I don't know where this idea came from. Historically, there is no idea of fiction being haram. Fiction, the Quran even speaks about masal, about parables. Parables is something that's always been there in our religion. We've never had a problem using parables to preach messages. So it's a very strange idea.
Listen here, guys. Don't take things too seriously. This thing that we call life is something that is ever changing. We're going through this tough time. These days, there's so many things that are going wrong in the world. Actually, majority of the things that are going around in this world is negative. But just stay reassured that, this isn't permanent. Nothing is not good, not bad. So it's a rough patch. We'll get out of it soon. All right?
Excellent. And on that very optimistic note, we will take our leave. For the last time in a long time, the scholar and the student is taking a bit of a break because I've got exams coming up and there's some other projects I also want to focus on. We'll let you know about what those are. But until we meet again for Season 2, this is myself, Moss, from Mahalape for the scholar and the student with my brother Hashmat. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings, peace and love unto everyone. Peace out. Have a great day.
Do